2023 is just a couple months away, but for some reason, scheduling, recruits, 2024 seems to be on everyone's mind right now. And we will dig in deep here on Sooners Live for the next 60 with all of you. Please leave your comments and questions there in the live chat. Consider contributing here at the Voice of College Football. And of course, hit the like button on your way in. Get that out of the way. Subscribe here as well. We got Jason Ray right next to me. We got Jason Watkins down below from College Football Hall of Fame Podcast. Check out Jason's work right there. College Football Hall of Fame Podcast. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Mark.
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, Ray, we'll lead off with you. And Derek LeBlanc. So, this is a situation where if this was 5 years ago, we might be shocked and surprised. And I still think that maybe we're in the surprised category, but we would be shocked. But with player movement being what it is, but now this is taking it to another level where there's only a handful of cases across the nation the last few years since the transfer portal is really heated up, where a player doesn't even step on the field for a particular team. Eric Gilbert, LSU, Florida, Nebraska now. Without enrolling, and now they're making decisions to not even play any football games before moving on. Derek LeBlanc hits the transfer portal.
Yeah, Mark, I think you said it perfectly. I think I'm not shocked, but maybe a little surprised. For a kid to come in and not even make it to fall practice before officially hitting the transfer portal is. Again, we've seen this happen before, but it's kind of a weird situation. I don't know if it was, and every kid's different. Their situations are different. Some of the things, and Jason, you might have heard the same thing, but some of the things that I've heard is he wasn't super thrilled with Schmitty and his off-season program, conditioning program, and I think he was a kid that kind of thought he would be able to come in right away and be a starter across that defensive line, which certainly, it's too early to tell for one, but maybe he saw the writing on the wall. So I don't know. These are the things from a portal perspective that I love the transfer portal, but these are the ones I struggle with. You don't even give yourself an opportunity to work. You don't even give yourself an opportunity to compete before you go elsewhere. I would assume he probably looks at UCF. I think that was one of the ones that was right there in the mix with Florida. A little bit of a weird situation, and I think it's unfortunate for Oklahoma. I think it hurts them from a depth perspective. Obviously, coming into this season, not necessarily this season, but 2024 specifically. So I think this is still going to be another need that Bates has in this 24 cycle as well.
Yeah, I think you're right on all that, and I guess I've kind of heard the same thing what you were saying about with Schmitty and his. Listen, this has been kind of one of those things that some of those guys can handle it, some of them can't. And you talk about. There's a reason why Malcolm Kelly isn't probably in Oklahoma this year is because him and Schmitty didn't get along. So, they're definitely some – he's produced, 7 Heisman Trophy winners, so I tend to kind of go with what he does. But in the end, I think you were probably most right on when you said that he may have seen the writing on the wall. And you keep hearing a lot of stuff about Williams-Nwaneri, who was there this past weekend at the official visit. Even David Stone went spend some time in Miami, and then he made it back to Oklahoma for the weekend to spend time with some of those guys as well. So I think when you start looking at the guys that there's no guarantee on anything, but when you start looking at some of these guys that we've heard they've been trying to commit for a while, Coach Venables hasn't allowed it yet because he knew they were going to continue to take their visits, but it looks like they're pretty firm in the camp of Oklahoma. He probably did see the writing on the wall. And if you start hearing from back home that you got guaranteed to start there at UCF, you're closer to home, probably have some parents in your ear, friends, things like that. It's not as crazy as it seems like it would be for him to leave before even playing a snap or anything like that. So I think it's a unfortunate thing about the portal. I also think that sometimes it's just the way things are. I think it's just sometimes the way things are. And I think, Okie Tracy's I'm beyond ready for these kids to commit, definitely burned out. Yeah, this is the recruiting process. Here we are, we're in June, and you still have the better part of 7 months before any of this stuff goes down, and they put pen to paper. There's going to be a lot of swings in this thing. You'll get swing. I know that about this time last year is when you started seeing a bunch of big commitments. Jackson Arnold. We've talked about this in the past. Jackson started, then he had PJ Adebawari showed up and got into the camp. Macari Vickers, it just kind of rolled from there. I think you're going to see that time, but I also feel like at the end of the day, a lot of this is going to come down to how do they start out the season? How do they look towards the middle part of the season? Are they going to be in contention for the Big 12 championship? I think that would be kind of the booster to their recruiting year this year. I know they got a top 4 with having a tough year a year ago, but I also think that may have boosted them a little bit with some of these guys thinking, well, yeah, I may play right away because they were that bad on defense. I don't know that that's going to be the case this year. I think that some of these guys are going to want to see, first, them play better, and second, I think they're going to want to see a commitment from somebody like Stone or Waneri or some of these other guys that can be that anchor of a defense like that.
When Schmidt took over as strength and conditioning coach, Jason and I had a number of conversations about the radical change in culture, radical change in work ethic, requirements, the responsibilities placed on these young men, and having to step up and really take on a grind to try to, match the level of expectation to be an elite program. Have we heard about any other grumblings or any of the other past departures being connected to the strength and conditioning?
No, I haven't, Mark. I mean, this is the one. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's going to be some kids that are like, because it's like you mentioned, Mark. It's a big transformation between what Oklahoma, some of these kids had under Riley and Benny Wiley as the strength and conditioning coach versus what Venables looks for. It's kind of like you're going from the country club atmosphere to you're going to kind of work in the mines, right? Like you're going and you're in solution.
Somebody told me it's like going from yoga to, the yoga class to the, being a bodybuilder.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, I mean, you think of it from that perspective, Mark. I think there's a lot of, some of the, and that's part of I think some of the struggles that we had last year with this team, right? I don't think there was a complete buy-in all together with some of the kids that have been here for 2, 3, and 4 years in the past. Now you're seeing some of that buy-ins from these younger kids, and that's why a lot of them started to get to play quite a bit towards the end of the season, right? So I think it's I mean I think you see that. I mean he's been successful everywhere he's been, Mark. Like whether it was at Oklahoma, Notre Dame before that, Texas A&M, like he's got a track record in and of itself. So I think it'll be interesting. I think you're going to see some dividends play one way or the other in just the way these kids look coming into this 2023 season and fall camp. I mean, it was a little bit, even me, I think I had probably too high of expectations too early, just knowing that he would, it takes a good year, to change your body in the way that you need it to look. But I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard any kind of really serious disgruntlement over that.
Yeah, I don't think it's like I don't think anybody's left because of it up until this point, and I don't even know that that's really why Derek left. To be honest with you, I don't think that everybody always is going to fit into it. I don't even think in the end the weight room is far from the only place that there's a lot expected out of these kids. So if you come from a system where they're not pushing you that way, and you come into a system where, I'm sure you've heard a lot of the same stuff that I've heard. Coach Venables, especially, he's not okay with the way that defense performed a year ago. He's being very hard on them. He's hard on his coaches about making sure that they're doing the things that they need to do. he's building a championship defense. So you're either got to get on board or don't. But the truth is, maybe he just saw that he wasn't going to fit in there. It was going to be too hard for him to probably get a lot of playing time. I start looking at some of the guys that they brought in through the portal that you expect are probably going to play right away. And you don't know that maybe what was the kid's name from California, the 3-star? I keep hearing that he's looking better and better as he's gotten in the weight room. I know that the defensive tackle, what was his name again, Jason?
The portal kid.
No, he's a freshman, but he was the 3-star kid that came in towards the end of the year.
I'm drawing a blank myself.
I am too, but anyway, he was kind of a late bloomer. His junior season, you know, he was big, but he wasn't as trimmed down. In his senior season, he looked great, and it's one of those things where I feel like competition breeds some of this, and some guys do very well with competition. Some are better when they're just the guy. You know, they come in and they're already the guy. Maybe that's going to be the case at UCF. I don't see that you're going to get a ton of those guys that are SEC guys going to even being in Florida, going to UCF a lot. So maybe it was a situation where he knew he'd go in there and be a starter. He's not going to have to work that hard. But I think that there's a lot of expectations on these guys to step up now, and not just in the weight room, but there's a lot of expectations there. So the bar's being raised, and maybe he just wasn't a fit, you know? Yeah. I like that comment right there too by Phil BV. Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about Ashton Sanders from California?
Ashton Champ Sanders? That's the guy. Yeah. And I keep hearing that, you know, he's been impressive, you know, and he loves the weight room. So, you know, with the transfer guys and that they're bringing in and him, and I mean, again, I still think the expectation is at least 2, maybe 3 of these 4 or 5-star guys that'll be in this class, providing everything sticks together the way it looks like it's going to.
Yeah.
Jason, we had the conversation a few months ago, and I don't know where this thought originated, that this type of step up in strength and conditioning, the immediate initial impact and result would be tearing some bodies down, wearing them down, it being tough for them to take on all that additional workload, then play a football season. But the thought process was long term, they're going to be fresher, stronger, and then that second season could pay dividends.
Yeah, I mean, I think you even heard this some of the kids' mouths last year, right? I mean, I think after like that Kansas State game, I think they had talked about, you know, how exhausted they were early on, just because of how, I mean, and I think there's a lot of things that kind of encompass that, Jason, Mark. I think, yes, absolutely, to your point, the off-season strength and conditioning was much tougher on their bodies than they were used to, right? They had a more physical fall camp than they've ever had under Riley than they did with Brent Venables, and so I think all of those things caused maybe their bodies to break down a little bit faster than you would anticipate during a regular season. So yeah, I think you'll see those dividends pay off more this year. The kids' bodies are much more adept to what is being asked of them this year. So I would certainly anticipate. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, Jason, that you kind of touched on a second ago, is I think last year across the board, but I think more so on the defensive side of the ball, we didn't have a whole lot of quality depth. And so a lot of these kids knew they were going to have to just perform absolutely terrible in order to lose their spot. This year, there's much more depth. I think we're going to see much more competition, not only through fall camp, but even through the season, week in and week out. So I think it'll cause these kids to play at a higher level than what they did last year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I feel like a lot of it too. I remember hearing things about Schmitty himself telling Coach Venables to kind of, if we're going to work them hard like this in the weight room, you're going to have to back off a little bit in practice. Yeah. So, you know, that there's definitely that, because he was seeing where some of these guys were getting exhausted, and you could see it in the fourth quarter a lot of times, you know, where they needed to make that one play and they'd have a mental breakdown. A lot of that comes from exhaustion. You know, when you, at the end of the game, are you mentally tough? A lot of that comes from physical strength. If you're conditioned that way, then you could be stronger in the fourth quarter. But a lot of times that's just not how it was. I do think that, in the end, this is the difference. This is the big change in one program from the other. And I'm not saying one's better than the other. I would hope that this is a better way than what it was, as a fan. You hope that this is the right way, but it's definitely different. And so there's lots to be said for big changes like that. And I think you were saying the right thing there, is that it didn't really matter how well they played. You only had so many bodies left over. You lost 44% of the roster going into the season. And it wasn't just quarterbacks. There was 13 guys off of that defensive depth chart a year ago that just weren't in the program anymore. Whether they went to the NFL or transfer portal or whatever, they just weren't there anymore. So the guys that were left over, then you add in a bunch of freshmen. You can see the mix of why it kind of turned into what it did. But knowing how Coach Venables is and how, defense is his thing. So he's been, it's all, for lack of a better word, a holy terror on some of these guys a lot throughout the spring. And I think it's going to be the same way in the fall as you get there. But they're going to be better, I think, a year in.
Yep.
The Jasons are here at the Voice of College Football. Boomer Sooner. We got Jason Ray right next to me. We got Jason Watkins, College Football Hall of Fame podcast. Check it out. Jason, what do you have going on College Football Hall of Fame podcast this week?
Well, we talked a little bit about, we've been talking a lot about the whole SEC schedule. I guess we're going to have, as Jason was talking about precast, there's going to be the official release of the schedule this evening. I think that the biggest thing that we've been talking about on my show is just what we had said a little bit before, or on your last show that you were on here, was the 8 games versus 9 game schedule. I think you got a lot of people pretty upset about it. A lot of people kind of bashing on the SEC for it, for sticking with that whenever it just kind of seems like such a scared move or a weird move, but we've been talking a lot about that. Obviously, Derek LeBlanc, he took up a little bit of time yesterday as well. We're just getting ready for the season like everybody else. We're now at 75, 76 days, something like that for the season. So it's exciting, man. It's going quick, but ready to kind of jump into it. It'll be nice to talk about actual games instead of recruiting that, you don't know what's going to happen for 7 months.
Amen to that. We want to watch some football. That's why we do this for 365 a year, is to watch 12, 13, hopefully more than that, football games. So they're pretty important. We've got a Discord available, folks. So what the deal is, go to patreon.com, search MarkRogersTV, or it's just patreon.com/MarkRogersTV. We've got Discord where you can talk to all sorts of college football fans all the time. You also get a bevy of other benefits, including watch parties, my predictions, and we got a guy, our buddy Steve Merrill from Wager Talk, who went 13-1 against the spread last year. So he gives us one exclusive pick per week. So get ready come fall. But we also provide our predictions, which are pretty darn good most of the time as well. And again, a lot of other exclusive content.
13-1?
He went 13-1. He couldn't believe it. And people, folks, full disclosure, don't expect that again this year. He's going to do really well, but 13-1. Yeah, it's never the Alabama-Tennessee game. It's like he finds a Colorado State Air Force game and says, you got to take the over or whatever. He finds a hidden gem out there. 13-1. It just kept going every week. And it's a pick that he provides just to us.
That's a heater.
So we appreciate that.
That was a heater, right?
So another 14 pack this year at 9-5, 8-6 even. That'll get the job done. But 13-1 was crazy. All right.
In the portal.
We're in the midst of it when it comes to recruiting, camps, visits. Where do we stand? What's the latest? What happened over the last week that caught either one of your ears?
Well, I mean, here's, I mean, the state of the recruiting thing. You know, people, it's kind of funny. I mean, and I'm sure other fan bases are the same, but um, Oklahoma fans like live and die by some of these commitments that were either that Oklahoma was in on, or that Oklahoma was highly recruiting and they went elsewhere. So there's been a few, Mark, over the last week or so that have made decisions elsewhere that again has got Oklahoma fans up in a little bit of a I wouldn't say uproar, but a little bit of frustration. So Sammy Brown, a linebacker, announced his commitment to Clemson. Bryant Wesco, wide receiver, again announced his commitment to Clemson. And then there was one more. Oh, Stacey Gage, running back commit, had committed to UCF, and he's the guy that I think Oklahoma kind of backed off on a little bit. So I don't know how big of a blow that was, but you know, I think the prevailing comment or the thought here is, you know, those two kids, Sammy Brown and Bryant Wesco, both went to Clemson. Obviously, Venables' connections to Clemson a bit, so I don't know how much frustration there was there. But no, I think, you know, we talk a lot about the 3 or 4 big time defensive line recruitments that Oklahoma's in on. I still think Oklahoma's in a really, really good spot with David Stone. They're in a really good spot with Williams Nwaneri. I think Joseph Jonah is probably on the outside looking in. I think Georgia looks like probably the play there.
They're very heavy on him, right? They've been real heavy on him, and because of his teammate, I think too, is what kind of PG was talking about on the last show here. So,
yeah, but there's some other kids that Oklahoma. I mean, Devon Mitchell is a tight end who's a 2025 kid that is probably going to reclassify to 2024. He's going to announce his commitment, I believe, July 8th. So I think Oklahoma's in really, really good standing there. I like where they're at there. Jay-Sean Ross, a 2024 kid, defensive end. He was recently just at the camp, I think, for Oklahoma last week. So I think he's looking like a solid potential for Oklahoma. Caden Durham, another 24 running back. I think Oklahoma's in a good spot there. So, I mean, as Jason mentioned, I mean, this is the time frame this weekend. Oklahoma's going to have their biggest recruiting event of the summer. This upcoming weekend. Last weekend was big, but this one's going to be huge in terms of, you know, and Jason probably has more of the details in terms of all the official visitors that's going to be there. But this was the weekend. This was the weekend last year that kind of turned the table in terms of getting a lot of commitments that kind of came out of that, right? So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see that start to happen, as I mentioned, Devon Mitchell in the first week in July. But I've heard someone that say, one of the guys on the beat that kind of thought that Oklahoma probably into the season might have somewhere around 18 to 20 commitments by the time the season actually gets started. So would certainly anticipate some movement here in the June, early on July.
Yeah, and that list is for the Champion Barbecue that you're talking about. I mean, it's big. So there's a lot of big time players that you're expecting to be there. Some of them on officials, some of them just on unofficials. But my expectation is, you know, obviously the big guy last weekend would have been Williams Nwaneri, and of course David Stone spent a lot of time there unofficially because, as probably a lot of people saw, he was taking pictures with the coach there and at Miami as well. So he was back and forth from Florida to Oklahoma, you know, kind of living that jet set time. A lot of time this weekend, from what I'm hearing, the past weekend you had Michael Hawkins. Of course, we talked about him being there. That's a big, I think that's the biggest thing for you're starting to see him do a lot of what you saw from Jackson Arnold a year ago, stepping forward and taking on a big responsibility in the recruiting of some of his classmates. You were talking about the tight end. They played together. You know, they played together this past season at Allen High School. So you have, you know, wow. Sorry about that. I thought I had that turned off. So they played together, of course, this past season at Allen, and they had an amazing year themselves. So you start to see some of these things are starting to come together for the later classes. I think that that's important, when you start looking at those guys coming up. Apparently, you're going to have as many as what they're expecting, another, what, 5-star, let's see, I want to say like 25, 30 guys, that are going to be there, something like that, maybe more, and even just, some are on officials, some aren't. But I would expect that you're probably going to see David Stone there again. He spends a lot of time during the summer anyway. My expectation is also, and I've said this a lot lately, is my favorite recruit for this entire cycle is Nigel Smith. He hasn't hit 5-star yet, but I think that he's going to be a 5-star. I think you can tell how amazing he's going to be as a football player, not just with his work ethic, but watch him play basketball. The guy has foot moves, and he does things on a different way than a lot of kids that are just big guys you'd see them doing. I think that he's going to be, no matter where he ends up, I think this is a guy that no matter what, he's going to be a first-round pick type of guy, because he just works like that. His coach posted something on Twitter this week about he's been doing 2-a-day since school stopped, since the school year ended. He's been doing 2-a-day workouts ever since. So he just works at it. I think he's going to be a 5-star by the time December rolls around as well. He's my favorite recruit. And I know that everybody, as far as Oklahoma fans are concerned, we all want to see David Stone in an Oklahoma uniform. I'd really like to see Nigel Smith in one as well. I think it's starting to kind of look like he may end up going to Penn State or Ohio State. Those two guys those two teams are really in on him as well. It's definitely not a secret how good he is. But I think with this barbecue, Mark, you talked about it a couple of weeks ago. This barbecue kind of turned things around for the recruiting season, and you started seeing some of these chips fall the way of Oklahoma this past season. So I think everybody's looking forward to it.
Anything else on any of the recruiting happenings, Jason?
No, I think we covered it. I think it'll just be interesting to see what happens out of this. I mean, we've talked about David Stone a lot. I mean, he's a kid that I think both of us heard that he's tried to commit a couple of times. No matter what, I mean, it's very evident to see that this kid has an active hatred for Texas. He is very, very vocal.
Those horns down a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Oklahoma and A&M are probably the two biggest in his recruitment. I mean, Michigan State's there, but I don't know how big of a threat they are. But I think it's Oklahoma and A&M. But any chance he is on social media, he is very very strong in his stance of his distaste for Texas, which is interesting. But he's an Oklahoma kid.
I like that too. You see him throwing those horns down a lot. He's always wearing Oklahoma hats. Mm-hmm. The funny thing about David Stone, though, is he kind of trolls even OU fans on Twitter a lot. Which I think is hilarious, by the way. But a lot of them don't like it. But I think that he understands how crazy this all is. He's enjoying his recruitment. I'm all for that. I think that these guys should enjoy their time. Do I want to see him end up in an OU uniform? Yeah. I think that they have to. I think that Oklahoma has to do their part when it comes to NIL, when it comes to these guys, when it comes to Waneri and David Stone, and even Nigel Smith to some extent. So that's the hard part. When you start talking A&M, it's kind of hard to come up with the same kind of cash as A&M has, And I'm not saying Oklahoma's not broke. It's nothing of the sort. But they'd also kind of just go about it a different way, where A&M will throw money at the problem. Oklahoma's not going to do that. We've talked about that before, the relationship recruiting. This is if he feels like it's going to be drama, he's not going to deal with that. And not that I think that David Stone has even put that out there that he is about the money, because I don't think that that's the case. I think he's enjoying his recruitment, though, is all it is. And as I said, we didn't really talk about this, but Peyton Bowen's brother as well is going to be there at the recruiting weekend this weekend. I think that he's defensive back, another 4-star player. Looks like he's going to have a big season at Denton Guyer. And then you also had Beasley. What was Beasley's first name? He's the 4-star cornerback as well. Another guy that's going to be there. So again, still a defensive theme. And I think that that's obvious that that's what they need the most. is on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to get some of these offensive players, but I'm not too concerned about that part of it. I know that everybody's a little concerned about the receiver side of things. I think that one's kind of going to work itself out. If anything, one of these guys got to step up and show that they are number one. There's a bunch of guys that look like they can be. So I'm kind of see where it goes.
Right. No, and I think, just real quick here, Mark, I think some of the things that I've heard, I think we're molding both of these topics together just in terms of what this team looks like in 2023 versus some of the recruitment. And so I think I heard this said yesterday, and I thought it was just very eloquently said, that this season on the field is not necessarily pulling some of these kids that are on the fence about Oklahoma. It's really just kind of solidifying the kids that really either are committed to Oklahoma or are very, very interested in Oklahoma, right? So I think it's very important from that perspective, as well, to be able to keep a lot of these kids that they'll probably have committed by the time the season starts.
Appreciate everybody being here at Sooners Live each and every week. It's Wednesday, 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 a.m. where it counts. Please leave your comments and questions. Consider contributing here at the Voice of College Football with a like, with a Super Chat contribution. Also, before we move on to our scheduling conversation with the SEC set to release its format and its model for 2024 and beyond. That coming up at, I believe, 6 Eastern time tonight. And we will follow up on that. And I appreciate both Jason's reminding me, because we'll go live at some point as soon as we possibly can with a full lineup of Michigan at 5, Florida State at 6, Miami at 7. So sometime after that, after I get a few things cleared up, we'll go live with our response to that. And before we move on to the scheduling conversation, I watched about 4 innings of softball this week, and it's the first softball I've watched probably since my daughter was playing in high school. But I'm not going to say that I made the decision to watch softball this week. I was actually staying with some friends, and my buddy's wife graduated from Florida State. And so she was watching softball, and it was the final game. And I caught like the last 4 innings. And congratulations to, of course, OU's softball team. Another historic run, another all-time great team and accomplishment. Wow. That's the dominance is, they're in a place, and I know little about it, but I can do math. They're in a place where they can argue like all-time team dominance status.
Yeah. It's interesting, Mark. I think 61-1 was their final record. 53 consecutive wins to to end the season, and so I think there's a lot of dynamics around this. Mark, to your point, I think this, statistically, from a overall record perspective, it was the most successful season ever. There were some Arizona teams, I think some UCLA teams that only lost 3 games, but to go 61-1 was the most impressive season statistically. And so this team just found ways to win, Mark. Even
2
games
strikes.
They weren't as dominant in the College World Series that they've been in some years, right? They had a couple of really tough games against Stanford. They won 1 game 2-0, another. And she's from Nebraska. There was some. I'm trying to think of an analogy from a football perspective in terms of how good of a player that to go transfer to a team, probably that's not even in consideration. So I think there was some homesickness involved. I think there was some just kind of anxiety and just pressure that she just wanted to kind of go back, and she's won 2 national championships. She was the most outstanding player of the Women's College World Series this year, and so
she should have been Player of the Year. You know,
Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting to see. I don't know that I've ever really seen one of the best players in the country go transfer to a team that's just kind of mid tier. So
it'd be kind of like Caleb Williams transferring to, you know, Arkansas or something after last year winning the Heisman. You know, it's just kind of weird. Here's the thing I feel about it, and I know that early on in the season, even they were talking about. I don't think that this was a surprise to anybody on that staff, anybody on that team. She has some mental health problems, and she's been homesick. I think a lot of that, you know, when you start talking about the boyfriend stuff, you know, their Phil BV, I see that. Yeah, he plays at Nebraska, but her whole family's there too. And some people have very tight families. And so if she was, I know that it was something that they kind of all went through together, was when she started feeling that pressure. You know, they did something with, what was it, those blue bands or whatever that they were doing. That it was helpful. It was a team thing that they did to kind of help her keep it together mentally and stuff like that. But what I would say is that I hate it that if you've had even one, and we have, fan that's been out there bashing this girl for anything. She was clearly the best player in the country. I feel like this season. I know that she didn't win the Player of the Year, but she was dominant. When they needed her to step up, she did. You know, anytime Oklahoma seemed to get in trouble, they would put her back in the game if she wasn't pitching, and she would just do her thing. So to me, she helped contribute to 2 national championships. If it's going to make her feel better to go home and be able to be closer to home and deal with whatever's going on with her, great. Yeah. If Patty's not upset about it and her teammates aren't upset about it, we don't need to be upset about that either. These are kids. You know, there's stuff that's more important than sports and, you know, national championships. It's not like they have a hard time replenishing talent there either. So yeah. I wouldn't get too concerned about that. But what an amazing season all around. I was talking to a friend of mine. Said, man, can you imagine that one game in that Baylor game? I mean, they very easily could have won that. They almost went undefeated. Mm-hmm. I mean, they very closely could have went undefeated. You had you talked about some of the games in the tournament itself. You know, the Clemson game, they're down 3. They're down to their last strike, and they get a 3-run home run, tie it, end up winning it in extras. And it seemed to be, you'd have a game like that every few games towards the end of the season. And to be able to have that kind of ice water in your veins and just go out there and expect that you're going to figure out a way to win. I compare it to UConn women, the UCLA men. I mean, this is true sports history that we're talking about here. Yeah, it would similar to what, okay, could you imagine if UGA does get a 3-peat? When's the last time that's even happened? You know, it's just something that I know they're different sports, but I think they're comparable. It's so hard to do it that it would amaze me if they, you know, that's where I've been thinking of it is, man, it's going to be kind of, if UGA was to pull it off this year, which I don't think is a guarantee or anything. We're going to have a Georgia guy on our show tonight talking about that. But I feel like that's one of those things that you start talking about sports history all the way around. This has to go down as one of the greatest seasons in college sports history for sure.
To Jason's point, or his question about an analogy in football, in college football, not only do I think that is so unprecedented that I can't come up with a real life analogy, that's so unworldly impressive that I can't come up with a fake or made up analogy. Mm-hmm. Because when you think about the pitcher, the quarterback, so they're analogous. Mm-hmm. So national championship quarterbacks who have won back-to-back national championships, the ones I'm coming up with, there's very few. Yeah. They were not the premier player. AJ McCarron was not a premier player at Alabama. So he's the last one to win back-to-back prior to Stetson Bennett, who also very good player, not an elite top of the line, very best quarterback.
So walk on twice.
You go back to Nebraska and Tommy Frazier, not the best quarterback in the country. Go back to Matt Leinart, USC. They split a national championship for one of two. not the really good quarterback, won a Heisman Trophy. I
Sure.
guess he might be the closest comparison. I guess it would be Matt Leinart winning back-to-back national championships, or Trevor Lawrence, even though he didn't win back-to-back, he came close and they went 15-0 the first time. Had he transferred to fill in the blank, Missouri, but it didn't happen. And it, of course, wasn't going to happen. So not only is there not an analogy for it in college football, there's not even a made-up analogy that you can come up with.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right, Mark, and I think, I mean, it's taken. It'll be interesting to see where the dominoes fall. I mean, nationally from this, because I mean, yes, this is an Oklahoma show and we're Oklahoma fans, but there's going to be kids that are going to be lined up to want to be the ace of this Oklahoma staff. So it'll be interesting to see what kids hit the portal between. There's 2 weeks, I think, until the portal ends for college softball, which is June 28th. So yeah, that'll be interesting. But yeah, you're right, Mark. I mean, I can't think of anything, and it's interesting. Like, I mean, I think a lot of people assume it's going to be Nebraska, but it may not be Nebraska, because I think part of the concern, from her is, her family is, she's got a boyfriend that pitches for University of Nebraska. So does she go to Lincoln? But I think her family's from the Creighton area. So there's some thoughts that she might actually transfer to Creighton. So it'll be interesting to see how it happens for sure.
6:00 Central Time, everyone. So 7:00 Eastern Time, the SEC announces its 2024 college football schedule. Jason, you're going to go live at what point?
8:30 p.m. tonight. We will be live. We're there with Coach Isaiah Fowler from the Fan Addict Sports Network. They're Georgia guys, and along with JJ Kitchen from Talking Football with JJ Kitchen. So we're going to talk about that a lot tonight there on that show, and kind of get some of his thoughts on what he believes is going to happen with Georgia moving forward this year as well. I mean, I think that the schedule certainly sets up for them to be able to have an opportunity to win a third one. It would seem like, right?
Yes.
So I just feel like it's one, because I mean, once the Oklahoma game came off of there, it's really, aside from their conference slate, and it seems like they kind of, even that side of it's a little bit, it's easier than the West. Let's just put it that way. Glad that they're going to the divisionless system, even if they're not going to the 9 game. I do feel like it's just they're gonna set up pretty well for it. I think the question would be with Georgia, what do they look like at quarterback? It's not like they have a hard time with recruiting them, but we're gonna find out kind of where they're at on that. Stetson Bennett, it's like you were talking about, he was a walk-on, and then he went to a junior college and came back and walked on again. So, it's kind of one of the deals where he definitely has done some amazing things there, but they've got some guys that are pedigree-wise, they should be better off. I think that in the end, there's a lot to deal with trying to win 3 in a row coming out of the SEC, and, we'll see kind of what happens with it. Seems like everybody comes up short of it. You know what I mean?
So back to the schedule, what are your thoughts about what you would like to see or what you anticipate seeing?
I anticipate it's being pretty tough. Everything I keep seeing is that it's going to be, you're probably going to get Alabama and Georgia, maybe LSU. We're talking about the top parts of the top teams in this league that you're welcome to the SEC schedule. So it should be fun. And especially for that first season for Jackson Arnold, theoretically him being the starter, as long as everything goes well this year for Dylan Gabriel, no injuries or anything like that, it's probably going to be his first season as a starter. So, it's a little, hey, listen, I think that they're doing great in recruiting. I think that they're building for the future, but that doesn't mean that even if they were to go and win the Big 12 on the way out of here, it could be could be a different season the first year. And we've talked about a lot of this of what do these new teams look like when they get to the Big 12. I think you're going to see a difference in what do OU and Texas look like when they get to the SEC. They're built for for SEC football. I believe they're being built for SEC football, but until you've been in it, you don't know if they're ready or not. That's what I've been looking at the schedule.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see what the balance is between Oklahoma and Texas in terms of who both Oklahoma and Texas draw. I mean, I think, if Chip Brown is very, very connected, so I tend to believe his source, but he kind of talked about where Texas they're going to face Texas A&M and Arkansas on the road. They're going to host Georgia, so if they host Georgia and then Georgia's on Oklahoma's schedule, that means Oklahoma's probably going to Athens. Do you have a situation where Oklahoma is going to have both Georgia and Alabama on the schedule in the same year? That's tough. I mean, that's tough. I mean, if you look at a potential schedule with Georgia and Alabama and maybe LSU and Florida, along with some like South Carolina, Vanderbilt, and things like that, I think the balance of it will be interesting. Even if you have Georgia and Alabama, you can't imagine that you would have to go to both of those schools on the road, right? So you have one at home and one, but I think the thing that, beyond that's very intriguing, kind of even beyond the win-loss, I think it's going to be very, very cool. I mean, at least for me going, I haven't had season tickets for a while, but I had season tickets for 25 years, and seeing teams like Georgia coming to Norman, Alabama coming to Norman, LSU, Florida, some of these teams coming to Norman on a regular basis, I think is just going to be, it's great for the school, great for the university, great for the town, great for the program. Now, again, to your point, Jason, how competitive is this team going to be in year one? I think it kind of remains to be seen. That's why I've said all along, and Mark can kind of vouch for that, I think this is one of the most important seasons that Oklahoma's had in a long time. The schedule sets up very, very well for them to be able to win 9 or 10 games. Even if they're not incredibly improved, they still should be able to win 9 or 10 games. So I think if they're able to do that and challenge for a spot in the Big 12 championship game, even if they don't make it or don't win it, I think that sets them up in a really good spot moving forward. We talked about the recruiting side of it as well, but if the unthinkable happens and and they roll out a 7-5 or an 8-4, then I think it causes a lot of anxiety for fans going into
what hot seat for BV,
what that schedule might look like. So yeah, I think the other side of this that's interesting is I know we've talked about the 8 game versus 9 game schedule with what do those 4 non-conference opponents look like in 24 for Oklahoma? They're going to have to go get someone, right? I think they're going to have to go get 2 teams, if I'm not mistaken. I think right now they've got 2 non-conference games that are there, so they're going to have to go get a couple with that 8 game schedule. So I think that'll be interesting to see what. Not only who they schedule for both Oklahoma and Texas, but what the philosophy is around that scheduling. Is it more of a lighter schedule? Do they challenge themselves out of conference like they sometimes have in the past?
So, Jason, in having season tickets for 20 or 25 years up until whatever point, what are the biggest and best non-conference games that you've seen? Ohio State comes to mind in regards to not necessarily how good the game was, but the size of the opponent. Yeah,
the Ohio State one was really good. Oklahoma did not play well in that game, unfortunately, so it made the result not be. And that was a little bit of an interesting game because that game was delayed a little bit. It got a little bit because there was some weather in the area. I think there was like some tornadoes around, if I remember, or what exactly it was. But that was the interesting part of that game. But yeah, Oklahoma did not play very. I feel like that was like a 42-24, 49-24 type of game. So
yeah, I think you're right in the middle. I believe 45-24 was the final.
And so that one was Alabama. I mean, Alabama wasn't where they are now, but that was just an incredible environment in 2000. I believe that was in 2001. For those that remember that, Oklahoma, like this is where Jason White tore his ACL for the second time in that game. Oklahoma had a big lead at halftime, I think 23-3. Alabama came storming back in the second half. Oklahoma wasn't able to do anything with Hibble, and then they found a way to have a couple of shovel passes to Ronaldo Works, and they won the game in a very dramatic fashion. So those are the two biggest ones that I can think of off the top of my head right here, Mark, that were just big time non-conference games. I still go back to, in terms of conference games, Nebraska was the biggest one that was the coolest environment that I've ever seen at a home OU game, 2000, and then Texas Tech, and I believe, what was it, 2000, and would that have been 2007, with Crabtree, and where Oklahoma lost to Texas earlier in the year and then came back and made it to the just performed really, really well down the stretch. So I think those are the two biggest ones that I can remember from a non-conference perspective.
I mentioned non-conference because you guys were talking about how difficult is Oklahoma going to schedule against an SEC schedule in the non-conference, but also because for the first couple of years, especially, of course, the first year, these SEC conference games coming to Oklahoma, they're going to feel like non-conference games.
They will.
Mm-hmm. You know, when LSU or Florida or whomever's on the other side of the field, it's just going to look like a non-conference game. You're going to have to remind yourself, this is a conference game. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be strange, but cool.
I'm here for it. I can't wait. It's almost, you want to get some games at home, but I can't wait to go experience the SEC as a fan of a team that's coming in, to places like Death Valley and at LSU and Baton Rouge. And then even, hey, anybody who has seen a game at Kyle Field at Texas A&M understands that is insanity. The place literally rocks. It literally rocks and waves back and forth. It's a wild place. I'm excited to go down and check out the Grove at Ole Miss. I've never been to the Swamp. Can't wait to go see that. That's one of those things that Tennessee, Josh Heupel will be in there. I think there's a lot of huge storylines for Oklahoma fans, but I think you're right that it's going to take some time to get used to the fact that they are conference opponents now, and it's going to be fun.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Jason. I think I've had the opportunity to go to Neyland Stadium when Oklahoma played Tennessee. I had the opportunity to go to Notre Dame. Both of those were just kind of outstanding places. Tennessee was such a, they've been able to get back to the point specifically last year of where they've been, under Fulmer and those. But those, when Oklahoma played there, my gosh, those fans were just they were just so starved for a successful team and a successful program. Both of those are, their environments were totally different, but I think both of those things were big time environments. Now, the one thing I've heard, I'm interested, Mark, in your perspective on this. I've heard to a T, LSU is, Death Valley is a great stadium, a great environment, but I've heard they are unequivocally the worst fan base in the country, just in terms of how they treat visitors. I've heard some stories when Oklahoma played LSU in the national championship game a few years ago, just how bad their fans were. But I don't know if you've ever, either Jason or Mark, have you ever heard anything related to that?
Well, of course, I'm covering all of college football from a distance now, but in terms of actually being on the field, in the locker room, at all the news conferences, I covered the SEC for 7 years. So I was living SEC football every day, again, going to the games, in the locker rooms, after the games, the whole deal. But I didn't do a lot of traveling. I was doing the newscasts on the during the week, and I'd make all the College World Series and the bowl trips and the NCAA tournament trips and all that business. But so I only made it to 3 SEC stadiums: Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Alabama. Those are the only 3 that I made, and I made some odd neutral site games in Jackson, Mississippi, the Liberty Bowl in Memphis. It was interesting to interview a young Peyton Manning at midfield after Ole Miss and Tennessee played, because that was historic, because his dad played at Ole Miss and he chose Tennessee and all of that. But in terms of LSU reputation, I can't think of anything that I've heard directly, but that doesn't surprise me.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I've also been to, this was again when they were not the same in 2003. I've been to Alabama, by far the nicest and the most welcoming fan base I've ever seen. I mean, Tennessee and Notre Dame were great, but Alabama was by far the most welcoming. And again, they knew that they weren't good then at that point, right? Yeah. Gosh, I'm trying to remember the coach that was there at 2003. He'd coached in the NFL as well. Anyways, he'll come to me.
Was that Shula, or was that Francione?
Shula, yeah.
Shula, David Shula.
Yeah. David Shula, yeah. And so, but that was just, I mean, a fantastic environment. And so I can't imagine how cool of an environment it is now that they're rolling. So, yeah, it'll be fun. I think it'll be fun for the fans.
Been hearing a lot of the same stuff about Georgia fans lately, that they'll bark in your face and do all that crazy stuff and just, kind of act silly. I know the Oregon fans were not impressed at the first part of last season. So I saw a lot of that on Twitter.
Yeah, I did not get that fan experience. I love to be on the field. I could have been in the press box or the field. I had my choice. I always like to be on the field, even though it's difficult from a strategic standpoint to see what's going on. But, I watch the games from TV or the press box otherwise. So I liked to be on the field, just because you feel that thunderous roar and the players are right there and you feel the hits and all of that. But in regards to being, involved in the craziness that's going on in the stands, I didn't catch that firsthand in the SEC, at least.
Yeah, and it's as far as like A&M goes, they're pretty, and I know a lot of Oklahoma fans are going to give A&M fans a hell of a time, but they seem very cool. And I was there twice. One time I was in the press box. Once I was on the field. It was much better being on the field for me. I felt like the press box was about to come out from underneath us. It was literally that crazy there, that you would see the stadium swaying, and so it was pretty wild, man. Pretty wild. It's a cool. I've also been to the other game that was probably the most, and this was when I was still in the military, but I went to a whiteout game at Penn State, and whoa, unbelievable. And that was, they played Michigan that year, and it was unbelievable game. They ended up winning it. This was, of course, at the end of the 90s, so like 98, 97, something like that. So a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun there. A friend, one of my sergeants, he had season tickets because he was from that area. Talk about great people that, they were really cool. Even with the Michigan fans, they were really cool with them. So it was a fun game. A lot of fun to watch. Loud.
It's funny you mentioned that about Penn State, because we had some Ohio State guys mention a few weeks ago that when they were first making trips to Happy Valley, it was, we're so glad to be in the Big Ten. Welcome. They were just, so happy to be in the conference that they were so welcoming. But now that they've lost 11 of the last 12 to Ohio State, they're throwing bottles and getting a little rowdy when Ohio State comes to town. So that will happen when you get slapped around a little bit. All right, folks, we know that the deal is that the attention span is extremely short. It's like 1 second these days. I think it used to be 4 seconds, and now it's down to like 1.5 seconds for the average person swiping, through their phone all the time. So we're going to put it to the ultimate test on one hand, but on the other hand, you're all used to doing this all the time. So you got Jason with his SEC breakdown on his channel, College Football Hall of Fame podcast. So catch Jason and the crew there at 8:30 Eastern, and then I'm going to hit it at 9 Eastern on the Voice of College Football. So we'll have that on the Oklahoma channel as well. Of course, Oklahoma's heavily involved, so we'll just simulcast on all the SEC related channels. So you can go 2 screens. It's not difficult. So do that for us. Catch Jason's work there at College Football Hall of Fame podcast, and we're going to kick it off at 9 ourselves.
Great. And we'll be sending them your way as well to check it out. And yeah, I've got 2 screens in front of me right now. You can watch 2 things at once, right?
Absolutely. Jason, we appreciate you making this work in your schedule, sir. Thanks for being here. Jason up top for a zillion consecutive weeks. We don't have a show without you, so thank you so much for that, as always, being here. So the Jasons make this happen. I just kind of steer the ship a little bit, but cut them loose on Oklahoma Talk. So we appreciate them. We hope to be back next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time and see you all back here. Hit the like button on your way out and catch Jason at 8:30. That's 8:30 Eastern, Jason?
Yes, sir.
8:30 Eastern, College Football Hall of Fame podcast. And we will see you later. Our next show is at 5 p.m. Eastern, Michigan Live.